911, what is the address of your emergency?
My name is Tom Martins. I'm at 160 Panther Creek Court, and we need help.
Okay. What's going on there?
My daughter's husband, my son-in-law, got in a fight with my daughter. I intervened, and I think he's in bad shape. We need help.
Okay, what do you mean he's in bad shape? He's hurt?
He's bleeding all over, and I may have killed him.
Jason Corbett was brought up in Janesborough in County Limerick. When he was in his early 20s, he met Margaret Fitzpatrick, who ran a creche in the town of Raheen. The couple married, and their first child, Jack, was born in 2004. They then had a girl, Sarah. When Sarah was only 3 months old, Margaret suffered a fatal asthma attack. As with any family in that situation, juggling work and parenting is a challenge, and Jason advertised for the services of an au pair to help so he could raise his children while working at the packaging plant in Limerick where he was a manager. Molly Martins answered Jason's au pair ad in 2008, and the Tennessee woman moved to Ireland to take up that position. Over time, the relationship between Jason and Molly deepened, and they became a couple. He and Molly and the children later moved to the US to start a new life together, and they married there in 2011, settling down in the exclusive Meadowlands estate on the edge of a scenic golf resort. Jason's employers were able to organise a transfer for him, and he was appointed plant manager in Multi Packaging Solutions, based in Lexington, North Carolina.
Jason had an abundant amount of personality, and he was he cared. He was very compassionate. Sometimes that's like a missing link with some of your coworkers, and especially managers. Not all of them, obviously, but Jason had he had a special touch about really being compassionate, really caring.
I loved him. He liked us. He was personable. He came to us if he had questions, or if we had questions. It was we could approach him and ask him, and he knew if he did not know the answer, he knew someone that did have the answer, and he was just amazing.
He just fit right in with us. He joked with us and played around with us, and just a friend.
He was such a great guy. He got to know everyone, not just the people he worked with.
In August 2015, Molly's father, former FBI agent Thomas Martins, was visiting Jason, Molly and the children with his wife. In the early hours of August 2nd, Thomas Martins killed Jason by striking him over the head with a baseball bat. Prosecutors claimed that Jason was killed because his relationship with Molly was fractured, and he wanted to move back to Ireland with his children, but without Molly. But attorneys for Thomas Martins said he acted in self-defence after hearing a row between Jason and Molly and allegedly finding Jason choking his daughter when he went to investigate.
Typically we average about 5 to 7 homicides per year in Davidson County. We're the 10th largest county in North Carolina, so we're fortunate to have that low a rate of homicide. Most of our homicides do involve people who are known to each other. We have very few situations where strangers are involved, and it's usually the outgrowth of a domestic situation. We do have some situations where some robberies have been involved, but not often. But it's a relatively rare occurrence.
While Jason's family were still struggling to cope with their grief at his violent death, they were plunged into a transatlantic custody battle for his 2 children. Jack was 10 and Sarah was 8 when their father was killed. Not yet charged in relation to Jason's death, Molly set about trying to secure custody of Jack and Sarah. The reaction to that from across the Atlantic in Limerick was Jason's sister Tracy Lynch getting on a plane. She flew to Davidson County with Jason's will, in which he had stated that in the event of his death he wanted both of his children placed into her care. The battle was fought in a courtroom, and a judge ruled that the children should be taken from Molly and brought to Ireland. Only when they came back was their father's funeral held. By this stage, Molly had left Lexington and was living back in Tennessee, from where she took to social media, sending messages of love to the children and the entire world, posting pictures of them too. She was ordered by the court to stop such actions, but the images she had posted remain on her Facebook page today. Molly appealed the custody ruling, but ultimately lost. The children are now being raised in Limerick by Tracy and her husband David. In January 2016, Molly Martins and her father were formally charged with second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. The town of Lexington, home to Davidson County Courthouse, has a proud tradition of being the barbecue capital of the United States. It is small, the people are courteous and friendly, and in the main, everyone gets along. Tucked neatly into southern state Bible Belt America, the town has a lot of churches, and the old courthouse, built in 1858, is recognised as the historic cornerstone of Lexington. So when a trial such as a father and daughter being accused of murder comes to town, it brings with it a host of local, national and international media attention.
The fact that you have a guy from Ireland getting killed in the way he did, I think the fact that you have his wife and his father-in-law charged, you have a fairly contentious child custody case with 2 small children involved, and the fact that the second wife was an au pair, the first wife died of a sudden asthma attack, so you have all kinds of interest because of that. I think there's just a whole bunch of elements that just combine to make this, just that draws people in.
Defence teams for Molly and Thomas Martins tried to have the trial moved from Davidson County to another court, claiming the pair could not receive a fair trial due partly to the publicity the case generated. In the Irish justice system, we charge people with murder or manslaughter when it comes to homicide cases, but in the US, there exists a different bracketing of potential charges that an accused killer can come under. This also varies state by state. Local attorney Alexander Stubbs of the Winston Law Group explained how charges in Davidson County differ from those on this side of the Atlantic.
In North Carolina, we have first-degree murder, and first-degree murder is a willful, deliberate, intentional, premeditated killing of another person unlawfully. So the key to first degree is that it is premeditated. Second degree murder is kind of a catch-all. It's every other murder. The difference is that there's no premeditation. There's still malice. Then you'd go one step down and you have your manslaughters. And voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing, but it's a heat of passion crime, or it's an intentional killing from provocation.
Today, a memorial and tree dedicated to Jason stand in the car park of the plant outside his office. The trial in Lexington may have lasted more than 3 weeks, but Jason will be remembered by his family and friends on both sides of the Atlantic forevermore.
Molly and Thomas found guilty of second-degree murder of Jason Corbett. Molly Martins weeps and cries aloud as the verdict is read out. Molly, I'm really sorry, Mom. I wish he'd just killed me. Jack Corbett, he will never watch me grow into a teenager, see me get married, or catch a ball. Retired FBI agent Thomas Martins, 67, and his daughter, Molly Martins Corbett, 33, were convicted of the second-degree murder of Limerick father of 2 Jason Corbett, 39, in North Carolina 2 years ago. Judge David Lee jailed Ms. Martins Corbett for between 20 and 25 years. Mr. Martins was similarly jailed for between 20 and 25 years. The precise length of both sentences will now be determined by the North Carolina Parole Board. The father and daughter were sentenced just 15 minutes after the unanimous guilty verdict of second-degree murder was returned. Ms. Martins Corbett, sobbing after the verdict, turned to her family in the public gallery and said, "I'm really sorry, Mom, I wish they'd just kill me." The young Tennessee woman also wailed uncontrollably as Jack Corbett, 13, Jason's son, had a letter read out on his behalf by Assistant District Attorney Alan Martin, in which he said she would always be remembered as a murderer and was not a part of the Corbett family. She, Molly, has put this burden on this family, and it will not be done until she is put away, he wrote, adding, as many in the courtroom cried, "She will always be remembered as a murderer." He said her actions had deprived himself and his sister of a kind, loving and adoring father and left the children orphaned. "I will never be able to give him a hug, to give him a present, to help me up when I'm down," Jack said of the aftermath of his father's brutal death. "He will never watch me grow into a teenager, see me get married, or catch a ball," he added. Before sentencing, Ms. Martins Corbett delivered a barely coherent emotional outburst to the court. "My father is not a murderer," she cried. Tracy Lynch, Jason's sister, revealed that just days after her younger brother's killing, adoption papers were sent to his elderly parents on Ms. Martins Corbett's behalf. After Jason's children, Jack and Sarah, were brought back to Ireland following a custody battle, the Martins family attempted to get an aircraft to fly over their Limerick school with a banner advertising how to contact Ms. Martins Corbett. Mrs. Lynch said the family were now determined to have the children protected from Molly Martins. Jason's mother, Rita, urged the court to give Molly Martins and Thomas Martins the same leniency they gave my son. Ms. Martins Corbett's mother, Sharon, and brothers wept in the gallery as the verdict was returned and the sentence was handed down. Both the father and daughter were immediately taken into custody, placed in handcuffs and taken to a holding area for sentencing. Members of the Corbett family wept and embraced as the verdict was confirmed. The verdict followed a dramatic 4-week trial in Davidson County before Judge David Lee and a Superior Court jury of 9 women and 3 men. The jury had been deliberating on a verdict since 3:22 p.m. on Tuesday. Several jurors wept as the verdict was returned after 3 hours and 20 minutes of deliberation. Ms. Martins Corbett wept and cried aloud when the unanimous guilty verdicts were returned by the jury of 9 women and 3 men. She had to be comforted by her lawyers. Her father remained impassive as the unanimous guilty verdicts were returned. There were emotional scenes in courtroom C of the Davidson County Courts complex as the verdict was delivered on the 16th day of the trial. Members of the Martins and Corbett families, seated across the court aisle from each other, became emotional as the verdict was returned. Present were Mr. Corbett's brother, Wayne, his sister, Tracy, her husband David Lynch, other family members and supporters. The father and daughter were supported by Sharon Martins and her sons, Bobby and Connor, as well as Ms. Martins Corbett's uncle, Michael Ernest. Davidson County prosecutors had claimed Mr. Corbett was fatally attacked because he planned to move back to Ireland with his children, Jack, 10, and Sarah, 8, but without his second wife. He had refused to sign adoption papers giving his U.S. wife equal rights to the children. His first wife, Margaret Maggs Fitzpatrick, had died of an asthma attack in 2006 when the children were both aged under 2 years. Ms. Martins Corbett was also the main beneficiary of a $600,000 life insurance policy on her husband. Her father, Thomas Martins, admitted he disliked his Irish son-in-law and wanted his daughter to divorce him. Mr. Martins told the trial he could not specifically recall telling a U.S. Department of Energy colleague, "That son-in-law, I hate him." Prosecutors claimed Ms. Martins Corbett first tried to dose her husband with the powerful sedative, Trazodone, in a homemade mint mojito drink on August 1, 2015. She had obtained the prescription for the medication just 2 days before. Mr. Corbett, who had been working in the garden of his Panther Creek home, had enjoyed about 6 or 7 beers with a neighbor on his front lawn earlier that Saturday evening. His parents-in-law, Thomas and Sharon Martins, had both arrived for an unexpected visit that evening. The father and daughter claimed they killed Mr. Corbett in self-defense after he attacked the Tennessee woman and tried to strangle her in the master bedroom of their home. However, Assistant District Attorneys Greg Brown, Alan Martin and Dina Stanton claimed the evidence indicated Mr. Corbett was first struck when he was in bed or beside the bed. They claimed the father and daughter then subjected the Limerick businessman to an horrific, heinous, brutal and cruel assault using a metal bat and a brick. Ms. Martins Corbett admitted she had kept the brick on her nightstand table. Jurors visibly winced as Assistant District Attorney Alan Martin repeatedly struck a courtroom table in closing arguments with the metal baseball bat used to kill Mr. Corbett to underline the sheer force required to crush the father of two's skull. Mr. Martin also recreated in the courtroom, with Assistant District Attorney Greg Brown, how Mr. Corbett may have lain prone and helpless on the ground while blows rained down on his head. They literally beat the skin off of his skull with that bat and that brick, he said. They, acting in concert, her and him, literally crushed his skull. They turned his skull into something that resembled a bad Humpty Dumpty cartoon. They beat him after the threat was over, after he went down. Mr. Martin said there are indications Mr. Corbett was struck repeatedly while helpless on the floor. They hit him at least 4 times after he was dead, maybe more. It takes a lot of force to crush a skull. They didn't just split his skull or rip the flesh off the bone. They crushed his skull. It takes I hate you force. Jason did not have to die that brutal and savage death at the hands of the woman he came to America to marry. His children, Jack and Sarah, did not have to be orphans. There were little bits of Jason all over her, Ms. Martins Corbett, that puts her in the thick of it. It is rock-solid evidence. It puts her there. Mr. Martin pointed out that such was the catastrophic damage to Mr. Corbett's skull that a pathologist thought the injuries were comparable to someone involved in a bad car crash or a fall from a height. To illustrate the point, Mr. Martin showed jurors the brick and the baseball bat used to kill Mr. Corbett, and then showed them photographs of the Limerick father before the attack and after the attack. This is what they did to Jason, he said as he held up a post-mortem photograph. This is what Jason did to them, nothing, Mr. Martin said as he held up scene photographs which showed the father and daughter totally uninjured. Mr. Martin urged jurors to consider the crime scene and forensic evidence as well as the testimony of police officers and paramedics at the scene. He said that the distinction between second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter turned on malice. You know what malice sounds like, he asked jurors. I want to divorce him, but I want his kids. He is beneath me and I am above him. He is not good enough for my daughter. I don't like him and his rowdy Irish friends who cuss too much and smoke outside my house. He is less than and I am greater than. I hate him. That's what malice sounds like. Murder, to cover up an assault by either one of these two people, is malice. He also asked the jurors to consider whether they can infer Ms. Martins Corbett may have obtained a prescription for the powerful sedative Trazodone just days before her husband's death in a bid to give it to him. Is it reasonable to infer that she tried but failed to dose him, he asked. The court heard that Ms. Martins Corbett had helped make fresh mint mojitos on August 1 and her husband had sampled one. Mr. Martin queried how the incident could have been self-defense when there wasn't a single injury or a mark on the father and daughter. He pointed out to jurors that, when photographed after the incident, Ms. Martins Corbett was wearing a delicate bracelet which had not been damaged, bent or marked in any way. Assistant District Attorney Greg Brown claimed that, having brutally bludgeoned Mr. Corbett, his wife and father-in-law then deliberately delayed ringing 911 to allow Mr. Martins, a counterintelligence operative, to come up with a story for what had happened. Mr. Brown said that, even when the 911 call was made, the duo then engaged in fake cardiac pulmonary resuscitation, CPR. They claim they had performed 600 chest pumps on the blood-soaked body of the father of two, but no blood was found by paramedics or police on their hands. Mr. Martins and Dems Martins Corbett denied the second-degree murder of Mr. Corbett at Panther Creek outside Lexington in North Carolina in August 2, 2015. The two defense teams said all the prosecution evidence corroborated the account of the Martins that the incident was due to them acting in self-defense. David Friedman, lawyer for Mr. Martins, said his client had no expectation of what unfolded that night. Tom Martins went to bed in a dream and awoke to a nightmare that night, he said. Mr. Martins has been trained in every firearm known to mankind. If he went with any inclination of violence, he would have brought something more than a little league baseball bat. What do we know about Tom and what he did for the previous 40 years? He spent the previous 40 years defending this country. I remember when being in law enforcement was a good thing. We have spent the last few days disparaging the FBI. He has served us, he has protected us, that is what Tom Martins knows how to do. So what do you think he was going to do, knowing his daughter and his grandchildren were up there? He was going to protect when he grabbed that baseball bat. All the evidence has shown that is all Tom Martins thinks about, raising a family, raising children and protecting. Tom Martins saw something he thought was not possible. He saw his daughter, having her throat surrounded by the hands of Jason Corbett. He didn't know why. But he saw that. He walked in there, he is there for protection and that is what he sees. He didn't want to be in his daughter's bedroom in his underwear. Mr. Friedman said the only malice in the case was linked to Mr. Martins not liking cigarette butts being left at his home from a pre-wedding party by Mr. Corbett's family and his son-in-law's drinking. That is absurd. It makes no sense. Who is more likely to have snapped that night, a 65-year-old grandfather who has protected us in his life from terrorists and drug dealers, or a man, from his own mouth, feeling dizziness when not taking their medication? We know he, Mr. Corbett, has had depression issues, we know he had sleep issues, we know that 3 weeks before he had his hands around Molly's throat he had anger issues. Don't listen to me, listen to him, Mr. Corbett. From his own mouth. We know he, Jason, had 7 or 8 drinks. Is that the best way to deal with anger and dizziness? Mr. Friedman pointed out that Mr. Corbett was drinking to excess while his children played around him. We do know he consumed a lot of alcohol. Tom Martins has been in this nightmare since August 2, 2015, when all he wanted to do was see his grandchildren and play golf. But Tom Martins did, that night, what he has spent his life doing, protecting. Jason never stopped being the aggressor. At any time Jason could have ended the situation and just let Molly go. Tom was in the fight for his life. His survival instincts kicked in. All he wanted to do was live. Tom had no choice, it was Tom or Jason. We are not saying that Jason was bad or deserved to die. But if he let her, Molly, go, it is all over. Jones Bird, for Mr. Martins, said the prosecution had not proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the father and daughter did not act in self-defense that night. What their evidence corroborates is what Tom Martins told you from the witness stand, Mr. Bird said. Mr. Bird said that the star prosecution witness, Dr. Stuart James, a blood pattern expert, offered evidence which also corroborates Mr. Martins' version of the confrontation with his son-in-law who, he testified, was attempting to strangle his daughter and then threatened to kill her. He said Mr. Martins' account of the blows he struck his son-in-law exactly matches the blood impact spatter marks. The lawyer also pointed out that key elements of prosecution evidence were not properly or fully tested, Mr. Martins' blood-stained boxer shorts and blood stains on the quilt on Mr. Corbett's bed. Mr. Bird pointed out that Dr. James never visited the scene, and never interviewed the emergency medical services personnel who attended the scene. He also queried why 2 of the lead police officers in the case, Detectives Hurd and Smith, never offered evidence at the trial despite attending the hearing every day. "They have been here for 3.5 weeks, but we have not heard a word from them," he said. "Why didn't we hear from them?" He also queried why the prosecution had not played the video-recorded statements taken from the father and daughter at Davidson County Sheriff's Office at 6 a.m. on August 2. Mr. Byrd also pointed out a blonde hair found in Mr. Corbett's fist at the scene was never preserved and never tested. "What else did they miss? What else have you not seen?" Defense lawyer Walter Holton insisted that Ms. Martins Corbett had nothing to gain from Mr. Corbett's death. She was not in the 2007 will. It was not about the children. They are gone home, they are in Ireland. She now lives with her parents. She has no assets, he said. However, Mr. Brown said the evidence indicated the father and daughter had subjected Mr. Corbett to a heinous and cruel assault. He said they had then delayed in making a 911 call to allow Mr. Martins, a former FBI agent, lawyer and counterintelligence expert, to develop a story for what happened. Mr. Brown said the evidence also suggested that the duo engaged in fake CPR life-saving procedures. He said neither were found to have blood on their hands despite the fact Mr. Corbett's body was soaked in blood. Mr. Brown also made reference to Ms. Martins Corbett's police statement. "I tried to hit him with a brick I had on my nightstand," she said. "I do not remember clearly after that," she told Davidson County Sheriff's officers. Mr. Holton said it was possible the brick was on the ground and Mr. Corbett was rolled over on top of it as the father and daughter were attempting cardiopulmonary resuscitation on his blood-soaked body.